Hello there. My name is Nick Bachicha, and this is a special project time presentation on LGBTQ+ and understanding the landscape of a diverse population. Here we go. So as far as my initial knowledge on this group, I do know about the Stonewall riots and about how Pride was a response to that and the anniversary, and now it's an awesome parade that's used for celebration. I know about the flag and how it was made in response to Harvey Milk's assassination. I know there's still legal troubles here and there with Trump's military ban not so long ago, and thank goodness that Biden reversed it for the transgender community. I know in 2020, in Title VII extended the civil rights to include a person's sexual orientation and gender identity, which is awesome. But I also know that still socially, there's a lot of violent acts towards people of this group, like the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, or the amount of transgender homicides, especially towards African Americans, and how this group is more at risk for suicide and harassment. So that's kind of what I'm aware of going in, and I'm also aware that I do have a certain amount of biases, not towards members of the group or sexuality, but I think at least the way the media's portrayed some of the more militant versions of LGBTQ, I think they can be really unaccepting of alternative views and conservative views. I think sometimes, I think just because of the factionalized identities, there can be an inconsistent message, which can even contradict depending on which letter's talking to which issue. And I think sometimes we end up conflating social and biological fairness, which my example here is just transgender participation in sports, which in particular trans females competing against biological females. And um, I think those are topics that are hot button, but I think should be discussed. And I just know that they're in my mind going in. So those are my biases I'm aware of. Okay, so we have lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or Q could be questioning. On the plus, we have intersex, asexual, and agendered, 2S, which is two-spirit, pansexual, and then ally. So that's the landscape of the LGBTQ plus population. The first breakthrough I had, which honestly should have already, but this group is not a monolith because the members are different and they have different levels of acceptance in society, different uses of the term actual LGBTQ, and also they have different issues. And for one, gay and lesbians are more likely to be out and accepted than other group members. The age difference also kind of relates to who uses the term. Baby boomers, only 2% relate to this term. Gen Xers, 3.4%, and then Gen Z, 15%. So as time is progressing, more and more people are beginning to relate to this actual term. And I said progress because in 1985, 89% of our American population were against homosexuality, which is crazy to think. And then now in 2015, only 39%, which is still kind of crazy, but it's getting better. But this gets to the next point, which is it's not equal across the board, especially in terms of your race and your intersexuality or intersectionality, excuse me. Um, so someone who's a white transgender is going to have a different time than someone who's African American transgender. And that's shown on the violent acts towards more of African Americans still. And because of this, there's possibly some group dissension of people feeling certain ways within this group. So with all this said, I'm asking, in this my head, like, why are they always presented as one group? But we'll continue. This is my stat guide, and it's just all the numbers that kind of really stuck out to me about how this population is treated. I see 80% of LGBTQ students have experienced harassment, 18 are physically assaulted in schools, and 3 out of 10 adults report the same out of school. 58% have reported hearing slurs and jokes. They're 1.5 to 2.5 more likely to experience depression or social anxiety disorders. Up to 30% have in this group experienced substance abuse, and they're 2 to 3 times more likely to commit suicide or attempt it than other populations of the same. And I think it's super important to understand some of these atrocities that are being sent towards this group. And also the vulnerability of what could happen. It's only a small, like 4 to 5.6%, depending on which article you're reading about how big this group is, and just the fact that they're that small and they're having this much uh, backlash, super important to be aware of. One of the themes that emerges is the pressure and discrimination of the dominant culture, which can be imposed systemically and personally through individual perspectives and beliefs. On a systemic level, we can have, the medical field that doesn't really acknowledge some of these issues or educate itself on the social issues that are happening, and even considers transgenderism still a mental disorder. And so those things need to be updated. In schools, there's constant bullying without policies against it or programs like the Gay Straight Alliance. Adoptions, at least in our Sue et al. Book, talked about how harder it was to get a child when you're one of these population groups. Churches exclude. There's just a lot of different places, and these are just a few, but a lot of places that systemically they can be limited. And also, we have to be aware that their family might be still stuck in this old way of thinking. So they could either, the family itself could be a source of strength or of a feeling of isolation where they don't accept you, and that's really hard on a person from this group. One thing that really stuck with me was just the internalized image about when you inherit the cultural norm of what's healthy in contrast to what you feel inside, and how you end up creating this inner homophobia with yourself. That is super important, and that's an Adlerian feeling right there, where it's this pressure from the outside that's creating your internal, maladaptive symptoms, and that changed the game for me when I realized that, because that's so sad that that happens. And we'll keep going here, but yeah, it just sucks. Coming out is a huge part of this process for them, and again, especially if they have a history of violence or they lack the support at home or from their peers, super makes it a lot worse. And again, not all groups in this society are accepted equally, and this is kind of what gave rise to my other breakthrough, which is, why is there such an inconsistent message? And I feel like this related to some of our readings about the ethnic and racial groups in America, which they don't dunk on each other out of necessity, because they themselves are all being attacked by the same dominant culture. And it's just, it happens that they're all being minimized and marginalized based on their sexual identity and orientations, that they have to band together. And sometimes when you do that, you're going to have some inconsistent messages. And that really helped to see that, a common enemy needs to be addressed, and that can help alleviate some of these internal structures or fractures between the group. I don't know where America went and got so finicky when it comes to sexual diversity, but it's nothing new under the sun. Like, you can look through history and see ancient Egypt, the Greeks, the Romans. Sexual experimentation has been around forever, and it's every bit as human as anything else. I digress. So we have Stonewall riots, the Pride Parade, the Pride flag as a symbol of the movement. We have spirituality, which we could look at this group as a spiritual movement in a way, or if you look at it as a political and social movement, then each member has their own religion and spirituality outside the group. But the issue there is that not all religions accept these members, and so that creates a little bit of unrest and conflict. Values seem to value equity and equality. There is a marginalization skill within the group based on your race and your gender, and how you identify, and be a little bit more like, if you're a gay or lesbian, more accepted, or if you're African American transgender, a little you'd be on the other side. So there's a good range there. Help seeking behaviors can look like depression, anxiety disorders, substance abuse, which is big here, and also suicide and all the ideations or attempts. Also, isolations could be on the lookout. And there's some more, but we'll get to that later. My conversation with Catherine. So, Catherine is a non binary human being partnered with a lesbian female living in Portland, Oregon with their partner's daughter. Um, Now, we spoke via Facebook chat a few times over 2 weeks, and I learned some things. 2017, they came out as lesbian, which was hard for them, but they did, and they used the terms she, her, hers are the pronouns. And then 2020 came out again as non-binary, and now use the pronouns they, them, theirs. And when I asked about that, they just said it just fit better and made more sense to them. It made them feel more comfortable in themselves and their own skin. And I get it. I get it. And so then I asked about, job, and they just left their job last year due to stressful and discriminatory environments. And one thing that was funny was that They spoke about how kids would ask really bad questions, but since they were so innocent, like they would just have to laugh. Like one question was, "What are you?" and and they would have to explain kind of what how they identified, and it was just really confusing to the child just to show how ingrained the heteronormative doctrines are. But that was interesting to me, and now they worked as a private nanny, and the mother asked about pronouns, and they said they felt seen for the first time and at their work, and that was really interesting to me too, an important piece of the puzzle. They've been 2 years sober, and now they live a quote unquote normal life, set healthy boundaries. National Coming Out Day was actually really big for Catherine, and that every year that they've come out has been on October 11th, and so that was interesting to me to have a little bit extra of backing behind some individuals to have that push to be able to come out to people you care about. Also spoke about JoJo and those role models, and also thank God for her support system and her loving parents who accepted when she came out, or when, excuse me, see, I'm still catching myself, when they came out to them, and that was really good. So to touch base on the last slide real quick, Catherine's been sober for 2 years, which is in line with a lot of the research and the literature that I've done about how some of these individuals turn to substances to deal with some of the issues. Um, so when you're being repeatedly exposed to chronic stressors and depressive symptoms and anxieties in the outside world, it's really easy to turn to some of those escape pathways. And for Catherine, it was important to get clean and get some clarity. But in doing so, they kind of got removed from the group that they used to run with, and so now they primarily use social media and Facebook to spread their messages. Pride itself still is a place for celebration and for standing for what you believe in, but it's kind of changed in a way for them, and it's becoming a little bit more serious over the years. We talked about Trump and conservatism. That went well. Catherine said just pretty bluntly that if you ever voted for Trump, you're a racist and you have no business talking with me. Now, I haven't voted for Trump, I never will, but it was good to get some of that dialogue out and to possibly open uh, some avenues for forgiveness on some of the middle ground for moderates that might have gone that way. And for me, it was good to see that Trump not only is a person, but he is more than a symbol of hate, but has done a lot of damage to a lot of people that possibly I haven't even been aware of. So that was really important to have that conversation and to hear those things. Um, Another message that came from Catherine was equity is not enough, and they pointed me to this kind of photo I have right here, which is speaking of revolution, which is a little scary, but it makes sense if you've been you know introduced to that much pain for that long. It's time for something to change, and I understand that. I can relate to that. But now Catherine's moving into other areas of advocacy like ableism, transphobia, uh, fat phobia, racism, poverty, and there's some other ones, but these are the main ones they're focusing on right now. And this last quote was one that they pointed me to, which is pretty much saying that if you're tolerant of intolerance, then at some point the whole system's going to fail. So that was important to kind of understand that's where they're coming from. And that's so in revisiting my initial biases, I think I need to make a slight calibration to the term militant, right? And I think there was still a mission in Catherine's mind, but it seemed more passionate and trying to seek justice than the more abrasive term militant. So I'll make that slight shift in my thinking, and that's a big thing for me. I also think the amount of conflict that could have had or was there was dependent on the context, which um, since I knew Catherine in 2016, and it's been years since we've had discussion, but they were more willing to have conversation with me and be open with me and be patient with me, asking these tougher questions that I don't think it would have been the same conversation if I was an outsider, being more confrontational or yelling at them, being like, "You need to change this," or "You're wrong about that." It was more peaceful, even though we got into some tense topics. I do think, or the identity label was barely a topic of discussion. It was more of a matter of respect to try to remember their pronouns, which I did slip up on a couple times, but they were really gracious and just called it out and made sure helped me get back on track. Um, when I asked about other groups, they didn't really speak ill of other groups, but did say that there's some lesbian friends in their circle that do have strong feelings towards some of the trans community, which was interesting. And again, to show that this is not a monolith and there are differing opinions within the group. Um, and we couldn't come to a solid agreement on the social versus biological issue, especially with sports. And um, they did say that they believe that limiting access hurts the movement for equality for everyone if you limit it to anyone. That's like Martin Luther King kind of mentality, but yeah, it's still a lot of fertile ground to be discussed on that particular topic. But that's just some of the things that have changed over the course of just a few conversations. So there wasn't much challenges to the literature review, but one thing that happened that was interesting was, so the literature spoke of how the children of LGBTQ parents are they're raised just as healthy as heterosexual parents, which totally agree. That's 100%. They're humans being raised by humans. Um, but I do think children can be influenced by the values of parents. And there was a joke that Catherine made that kind of made me just like, interesting, which was, of course, when they said, of course, I just want them to be happy, to feel loved and supported, but as long as they don't become a cisgendered straight white male. And it was it was funny at the time, but you always wonder like, hey, was it a joke or was it true? And I just don't know how it'll come about because we know that racism is taught, and so when we're thinking about what this child might be raised at going into society, it might be better. Honestly, it might be for the benefit of society, but we'll have to see how it all pans out. So a few of the things to be aware about as a counselor when you're working with someone from this population is first to understand where they are in relationship with the dominant culture. Now, and this is to say, like, any personal experiences that have been pushed on them externally, like racial slurs or just systemic discrimination, or any internalized homophobia they have. So then they might have some self-hate or guilt or confusion. It's really important to understand where they sit on that first. Also, to be aware of your own biases so you don't commit microaggressions. An example is catching yourself here and using not only their own pronouns, the right pronouns, but using language like partner instead of girlfriend or boyfriend. And also, it's to understand where they are in the process of coming out and whether or not they should come out and it's worth it, or weigh the pros and cons, and also where their partner is if they have one, and where they are in that process if they're out, and with who, and what kind of networks they also have, and any other supports that you can identify. So that's super important to be aware about. Social supports continued. We have family, friends, role models like JoJo for Catherine, and even their self as a source of strength and support. But it's important to know their relationship with their parents, whether or not it's supportive or their parents are in denial or feel that is because they neglected or feel guilty or ashamed of their own job, and that's why that this person was ended up, this way. And that could have a serious impact on the self-identity of whoever your client is. So it's important to know the relationship and whether or not it's causing them isolation, further shame, or anger. And it's important if they don't have parents to find those other supports, some sort of support in these other areas. Be aware of the other negative symptoms, not just depression, anxiety, but in the substance abuse, but also sleep disturbances and other somatic and cognitive distresses. But it's also important if they come in and they are like bisexual or they're transgender, just don't naturally assume that whatever it is that they're coming in for is because of that. That's a huge way to rupture the relationship and the connection right away. And make sure you're working together on goals and not just trying to think you know best. So, my view compared to someone that identifies as LGBTQ, even if we went to the same school, grew up in the same neighborhood, had the same friends, our experiences would be entirely different based on how we identified with the dominant culture and our expectations of that. So what I called routine or even normal could make them feel ostracized and different and having to hide who they are and play along with it. And so it could be a microaggression or offensive, just the language we use without even knowing it. And what I considered a safe place could have all along been unsafe for them. So just as a counselor, it's important to know that, to also understand that they might be hesitant to share things with you because they don't know you, they don't trust you, and you have to earn that with patience until they can feel safe in order to share things with you. So that's important. So for counseling and advocacy, the counselor first and foremost needs to educate themselves on the population and understand who they're working with. Um, and then they could also use inclusive language, not only in their speech, but on the forms that they present to the clients. And I also read about including LGBTQ artwork and making the environment more friendly for people that are in this population, creating that safe space, teaching coping skills, positive self-identity, and also working with cognitive distortions, which is why CBT seems to be a really good avenue for these sorts of clients. But also, again, reassuring the person of their own self-worth and that the problem is not themselves, but it's an external issue there. And then the advocacy, you have your legal issues, which is you can fight discriminatory policies, enforce it in housing, medical, school, adoption. A lot of different ways you can, petitions, any way that can help change the laws themselves. There's programs like the Gay Straight Alliance, In School, Out of School, the Trevor Project, or the Q, which is in Austin here, and it's a really cool place that teaches education, but also STD checks and other things to get people medical help that are in the LGBTQ, and even allies, um, support groups and hotlines and other community supports. Churches are still standby, even though there are people that frown upon members of this group in churches still, but it's getting a little bit better. And I know I was probably supposed to thread some of these Adlerian ideas throughout the project, but I just dumped them all here at the end. And again, the main theme is that it's the system that's creating these feelings of inferiority inside these individuals, and it's coming from a place of equality and inequality based on who you are and what gender guidelines you're following and what role models you're looking to. In a heteronormative society, we end up excluding some of these individuals, and they end up with pathological symptoms of distress, and the only way out of this is to help create a community feeling and by enacting our social interest and including everybody to where everyone can feel like they belong and contribute. And I think if we can do all that, we're gonna have a better world. That's it.